What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back in the video. It's Thursday. It's time for another player breakdown video. Your most voted on breakdown last week was actually 5 players: Chris Godwin, Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin, Diontae Johnson, and Calvin Ridley. It is a huge group of players going in a range that we really want to be targeting wide receivers specifically. So I definitely understand why you guys want those 5 ranks. So we'll look at those 5 today in half PPR scoring. If you want to see my full rankings for every player in all scoring formats, you can actually see that for free this season. All you gotta do, sign up for your first Underdog account using promo code FFA, make a minimum $10 deposit. They'll add a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, and you'll get access to my rankings, both Underdog and Redraft, emailed to you the following morning. You'll be able to enter some fantasy football drafts with your deposit plus the bonus. I recommend personally 3 puppy drafts. I think it's the best payout structure. They're all $5 drafts. Enter 3 of those. Put $10 in. They'll turn it to 15. Enter 3 drafts. Win-win for everyone. And you get the rankings again, including redraft. So, without further ado, start with Chris Godwin. So we're basically just going to break down each one of these wide receivers. And then at the end of the breakdown for each one, we're going to slowly construct the rankings. By the 5th one, we'll have all 5. So, of course, Godwin will be first on the list after his breakdown, but obviously have to break him down first. So, he enters his 8th season in the NFL, but he's a very young rookie, so he's only has turned 28 in February, so still in the prime of his career. Don't worry about age for any of these receivers. They kind of have varying ages, but all of them are in the prime of their careers. Don't worry about an age cliff for anyone. He's coming off his 3rd straight season with at least 80 receptions and over 1,000 yards, but it's been the touchdowns that have really held him back in fantasy scoring. Over the last 3 years, he's had only 5, 3, and 2 touchdowns last year, despite playing, right? He wasn't injured. He played 14, 15, and 17 games. So, small injuries here and there, but it's not like he hasn't scored touchdowns because he's only been playing 6 or 8 games in a season. 2 touchdowns in 17 weeks last season. In fact, we want to look at how unlucky he's gotten. Godwin has the 9th most red zone targets and the 8th most targets inside the 10-yard line among all players over the last 3 seasons, but he ranks 58th in receiving touchdowns. Among the 15 players with at least 24 targets inside the 10-yard line over the last 3 years, which again, Godwin ranks 8th with 30. Only 2 of those 15 have scored less than 20 receiving touchdowns. Godwin only has 10. He's been unbelievably unlucky with touchdowns, and that's what's held back his points per game, which hasn't even been that bad. He's ranked 9th, 20th, and then 38th last season. That's why last season was, he's 35th off boards right now. That's why, because he was 38th last year and not top 25. If he, had decent touchdown luck, been another top 25 performance, he'd be going as a top 25 wide receiver this season. Cherry on top of all of this, new offensive coordinator Liam Cohen. He was the old offensive coordinator for the Rams in 2022. He said that Godwin is going back into the slot and that he's going to play the Cooper Kupp role. Godwin is being drafted very, very close to his floor this season. I talk about that so often and how you de-risk a team. We still want league winners, and I think Godwin can be a league winner. He's on my must-draft list on the website this season. But what's also good is we can combine that with someone who's being drafted super close to their worst-case outcome, because even if we're wrong, Godwin doesn't see touchdown luck. He doesn't have an improved season, getting increased efficiency from the slot while also still playing on the outside in 2 wide receiver sets. Even if all of that happens and he doesn't have a great year, he's barely going to underperform where you're getting him in drafts. Again, he's a phenomenal pick. He makes the must-draft list on my website. And he's first because he's the only wide receiver we talked about so far. Next up, Christian Kirk. Entering his 7th season, turning 28 in November. Only has 1 season with over 80 receptions or over 1,000 yards, though it would have been 2 last year had he not gotten injured. Big change this season is going to be the Jaguars losing Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones, replacing them with Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis. I've made my thoughts on Gabe Davis known. I don't think he's very good. I think people just continually overrate how good he is. Josh Allen is a phenomenal quarterback, a good deep ball quarterback, someone who will get you the football if you are open, and Gabe was still highly inefficient on that team. So I just don't think Gabe is that good. But I do think Brian Thomas Jr. will obviously need time to develop, right? He's not going to be the best version of himself as a rookie, but I think he's going to add a really nice deep ball element to this offense that they sort of miscast Ridley into last season. We'll kind of get to Ridley in a second. But that wasn't like exactly how they should have used Ridley. They just kind of needed to use him in that area. I think Brian Thomas Jr. actually will fill a very important role in this offense and was for them a very good pick because he's just going to like be a consistent deep threat, a boundary receiver that they just kind of needed in how they're running their offense. My worries with Christian Kirk are twofold. One, I don't know that he's going to play in 2 wide receiver sets, or at least all of them, right? I think it's extraordinarily likely that, at least to some degree, we see a lot of 2 wide receiver sets that are only Gabe and Brian Thomas Jr. on the outside. Second, he's got this calf injury that, they're going to hold him out for what seems like this next week. He's not going to play in the preseason game. It seems minor. It's very likely this turns into absolutely nothing, but it's just a concern. It's something in the back of our minds of like, okay, he's got an injury that is going to hold him out for a week. It is a calf, which is something that, limits explosiveness, that can definitely be re-injured. And so it's just a worry in the back of our minds. Again, maybe you're watching this the week after it goes out. Maybe you're watching this the week of basically the week before the season starts. And he's already back at practice. He's going to be fine. The part out. It's just something that right now, if we're drafting, it's something to keep in mind. But my main worry is really more the snaps. Like, he's been producing decently because he's out there, 80, 90% of snaps. But if that drops because he's playing mostly in 11 personnel, and when they move into 12 personnel, he's just not on the field as much, obviously you can only score so many fantasy points if your snaps go down, right? Like, so even if he's coming off the field more on run plays, there are still times where they go play action, still times where they don't run the ball in those formations, and he's not on the field, he can't score fantasy points. I also think things are far less condensed than people kind of assume in Jacksonville. Brian Thomas Jr., Kirk, Gabe, Ingram, Etienne. It's not the strongest 5 in the league, but it's a very strong core of 5 skill players. And as much as you're going to want to throw up when you hear this, Tank Bigsby, Parker Washington, they have objectively made strides forward this offseason. They are going to be used more than they were last season. And Parker Washington specifically will get some slot usage. And so they will actually be able to have some 11 personnel, even potentially, where Kirk isn't on the field. Now, I still think Kirk's a starter. I don't think he's getting benched or anything, but we're just opening up a few more paths this season to where they don't need to have him out there 90% of the time. He could very easily drop down to having a lot more games at like 65, 70% of snaps, and it's just slightly concerning. Now, to me, he's still a relatively safe pick because I do still think he's the best wide receiver on this team. I just think he's one that kind of lacks ceiling. His best season ever was 18th in points per game. And to be honest, like, what he did 2 years ago in that best season is probably the best case scenario outcome for him this season, which is like still a good outcome for him. If you take him in the middle rounds, you'd still be very pleased with him getting 18th in points per game. But it does feel like his ceiling. And at this point of the draft, I mean, we're about to talk about 5 wide receivers, 4 others that I love, that I think have extraordinarily high ceilings this season, who also, just like Christian Kirk, does have a pretty decent floor. If your ceiling is that you're a low-end wide receiver 2, I don't know. I'm not in love with this. So at least right now, I'm going to rank Christian Kirk behind Chris Godwin. I think my stance on Kirk is probably going to surprise people. I just think there are just a lot of different outcomes to where we can look at a lot of people among these 5 where they are clearly the number 1 on their team, or they clearly have a ceiling. Would it surprise you at all if Evan Ingram had more receptions than Christian Kirk? No. Would it surprise you at all if Brian Thomas Jr. steps up in his first season, sees a huge downfield role, and he outproduces Christian Kirk in fantasy? No, especially if we add in touchdowns, which is probably going to be his area. Would we be shocked if Tank Bigsby plus Etienne just allows them to run the ball a little bit more often, utilize the running backs a little bit more heavily, because they had to scale back a little bit in Etienne last season because Bigsby was so bad. If Bigsby's not bad anymore, then maybe they can utilize running backs more. And it's like there's just so many things in this offense, and it's not like I think the Jaguars are a top 5 offense in the NFL. I don't truly believe in Trevor Lawrence being, a real game changer, I guess, at the quarterback position. I don't know. I have worries with Christian Kirk, and so definitely behind Chris Godwin for me. And as you can tell, he's probably going to be towards the bottom of our list. Next up, Terry McLaurin. I'm going to save a little bit of suspense here. I do think McLaurin's first on this list. Now, I think it's close for everyone. And I genuinely believe if you get to the end of this entire breakdown and you want to jump things around, do it, right? I'm just giving my take, my opinion. If you think differently and you're like, no, Nick, I truly believe Chris Godwin should be first. I truly believe that McLaurin is capped. Go for it, right? To me, though, I think he deserves to be first. 4 straight seasons with at least 77 receptions and 1,000 yards. Like with Chris Godwin, though, struggled a little bit with touchdowns. Unlike Godwin, though, he's actually done really well overall with his usage. So Godwin's has extreme usage, hasn't done amazing in the red zone. McLaurin's done great in the red zone with his usage. It's just that he hasn't had a lot of usage in the red zone because they're obviously not that great of a team historically. Main thing holding McLaurin back in recent seasons has just been quarterback play. Alex Smith, Dwayne Haskins, Kyle Allen, Taylor Heineke, Garrett Gilbert, Carson Wentz, Sam Howell, and Jacoby Brissett. Those are the quarterbacks he's been playing with. That's a pile of absolute garbage. I know that Jayden Daniels is a rookie, but there's for sure a chance that, like, while he needs time to develop, and he's not going to be, you know, the best version of himself in this first season, kind of like Brian Thomas Jr., like all these rookies, they're not going to max out in year one. Probably still going to be the best quarterback even this season that McLaurin has played with. McLaurin has basically said as much in camp that, like, even in camp, he was already basically, these are the best targets McLaurin has been receiving. Main appeal with McLaurin is the potential target share. He is far and away the best wide receiver that they have. Jahan Dotson had a lot of hype coming into the league, had a decent rookie season, but a terrible year two. Has not been separating from Dyami Brown, we know Dyami Brown is capped. He's not that good of a player. We look at last season, and it still is a little bit shocking how low the target share was for McLaurin, but that could just be a Sam Howell thing. That could be a quarterback thing, a coaching thing. Like, that doesn't mean that Terry McLaurin is not clearly the best wide receiver on this team. He is clearly their best wide receiver, and I absolutely think there's a chance that Jayden Daniels, who's, again, probably the best quarterback he's played with, recognizes that a little bit more and kind of hyper focuses on McLaurin to where we look back at this and we're like, oh yeah, with, like, you know, Ertz, a rookie tight end with kind of trash wide receivers behind him. Yeah, McLaurin clearly had the upside to have a 25% target share. Last season, you know, somewhat disappointing because the target share again was lower, but then also he weirdly saw both his yards per reception and his catch rate drop. Like, usually those are inversely correlated. So when you have consistent career, you know, those numbers kind of stabilize. Maybe you have a year where yards per reception increases, but that's because you're getting more deep looks. So catch rate drops. Other flip side, maybe catch rate increases, but it's because everything's coming close to the line of scrimmage. Yards per reception drops. Usually they kind of go like that. They don't usually both drop to pretty poor numbers. That's what happened last season again because they had really bad quarterback play. He only had a 30% catch rate on his deep targets because the targets stunk, right? Like, again, I truly believe Daniels is going to be much more accurate than the quarterbacks McLaurin has been playing with. So when you combine that with a Cliff Kingsbury offense and a bad defense, we're going to run into a lot of games where we get into really high volume. As per ETR, the Commanders have been 20th, 22nd, and then 31st last season in situation neutral pace of play. They were 18th last season for perspective in plays per game. As an NFL head coach, Cliff Kingsbury's offenses are the fastest paced in the NFL. No team in the NFL is going to run no huddle at a higher rate. Then you look at the preseason, no team played faster than the Commanders. So again, you combine that all with the poor defense leading to trailing game scripts, elevated passing rates. It's pretty easy to see a lot of games this season where play volume is going to skyrocket. And so if McLaurin is clearly their top wide receiver on potentially the fastest paced team in the league with probably the best quarterback play he's had in his career, he's set up for a really, really strong season. He's an exceptional wide receiver that is always underrated because of quarterback play. Again, I just think he deserves to be first on this list. So McLaurin, then Godwin, then Christian Kirk. What about the final two? Diontae is up next. And what do you know? He's also entering an improved situation. Might not seem like that joining the Panthers. You're like, no, Nick, the Panthers were worse than the Steelers last season. Sure, but he steps in as the clear X wide receiver in a Dave Canales offense, which is something that we love. And we just know Diontae is good. Another wide receiver that is just always underrated by the community. He ranks top 4 in ESPN's open score 4 of the last 5 years. Matt Harmon over reception perception. He charted him with an all green route tree last season, cleared the 8th percentile versus man, zone, press coverage, elite versus double teams. Diontae is an incredible wide receiver, one of the best in the league, especially at gaining separation, and he really doesn't have any target competition. He's got a 34-year-old Adam Thielen. Mingo has been outplaying Leggett in camp, and Mingo was awful last season. People have said Mingo's been better, and maybe that's true, but he hasn't looked very good in the preseason. And if he's also outplaying Leggett, how good is Leggett going to be? Diontae, 27, 28% target shares in his range of outcomes this season. Like, do I think it's going to be that high on average? Probably not. But we're looking at a player who has a very strong chance of clearing a 25% target share. Even last season with a much worse offensive coordinator, at 33 years old, Adam Thielen was the wide receiver 11 through week 11. And then he kind of fell off because he's 33 years old in the second half of the season. Of course, he's going to fall off. Again, that was with a worse offense coordinator. That was with Bryce Young doing horrible as a rookie. That was with the Panthers scoring 13.9 points per game. They still supported their number 1 wide receiver being the wide receiver 11 overall, a low-end wide receiver 1 through week 11. Dave Canales is a great coach who is behind Geno Smith's breakout in 2022, Baker Mayfield's breakout in 2023. 2 seasons where we can look back right now and be like, oh yeah, Baker's fine, Geno's fine. That, not in those seasons, right? We were looking in 2022 being like, is Drew Lock going to beat out Geno Smith? Is Geno Smith even competent? Then he had a great year. Baker Mayfield last season, I'm like, well, can he really support Godwin and Evans? He's not very good. He had a really strong year, the best season of his career as well. So I'm really excited to see what Canales can do with Bryce Young, who was, again, the number 1 overall pick last season. He's a very high-end prospect that I don't think people should completely write off. Play volume, touchdowns, those are going to be a much larger concern still for the Panthers than, these teams that we've kind of talked about so far. And that's why I don't think I can rank Diontae first. But I do think he deserves to sit like right above Chris Godwin in our rankings so far as second on the list. He is very clearly their number 1 target, very clearly their best player in the passing game. And so even on a lower volume offense, a slower paced offense, a lower scoring offense, I genuinely think he's capable of racking up 110, 115 receptions this season. That is not something anyone else on this list can say. I can't put him over Terry McLaurin because the Commanders are going to destroy the Panthers in play volume. Like, it's not even going to be remotely close. And so if their target shares are anything even close to similar, McLaurin is going to have more value. And I do think he's the number 1 on this list. But I think it is McLaurin, then Diontae, then Godwin, then Christian Kirk. So that leaves us with only our 5th wide receiver. Calvin Ridley enters his 6th season in the NFL, but because he was an old rookie and he got suspended for a season, he's actually turning 30 in December. Again, I don't think age is a concern for anyone on this list, but if you were to assign it to anyone, you would assign it to Calvin Ridley. In his return last season, though, 76 receptions, over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. Jaguars really just misused him. They used him as a boundary X receiver. They didn't scheme him any layup routes. They forced him to earn every single yard that he got. And he did a good job, but it's just difficult to post high-end numbers as a boundary X receiver deep downfield. Everything you get is not schemed. It is all earned. This year, you've got the Titans giving him a 4-year, $92 million deal, $50 million fully guaranteed. As a comparison, it's a very similar deal. The year is a little bit different, but if you just look at the overall structure of the deals, very similar to Nico Collins, Michael Pittman Jr., and Devonta Smith. The deals that those 3 got are extraordinarily similar when you look at guaranteed money, you look at per year money, you look at what they can do in terms of like outs in the contracts, all very, very similar. So the Titans are heavily invested in Calvin Ridley. This is also going to be a way different offense than we're used to seeing for Tennessee. The Titans ranked 31st in situation neutral pace of play under Mike Vrabel the last 6 years. You compare that to Brian Callahan. who they now have, obviously. He was the Bengals offensive coordinator. The Bengals ranked second in situation neutral pace of play. So they're going from a bottom 3 team in situation neutral pace, so on average they play slow, very slow, to a team that's probably going to be top 3. The Titans were also a very run-heavy team under Vrabel. That's going to shift. They're going to be a very pass-heavy team now. So what you expect to see from the Titans is going to look completely different from what they actually looked like this season. The one big hurdle is the unknown with Will Levis. Will Levis ranked 24th in EPA per dropback as a rookie. He was dead last in completion rate over expectation. We simply just don't know if Will Levis can be a good quarterback. Our current evidence is that he is not a good quarterback. If Will Levis does step up, it could be a big year for Ridley, and he could end up being a steal. But again, we know that there's definitely a chance that Levis really just isn't that good at all and just kind of caps everyone's ceiling on this offense. Now, I get that you could say the exact same thing about Bryce Young. Bryce Young was terrible as a rookie last season, but Levis was also, like, we didn't expect him to be good, right? He was a much worse prospect. So it's like he comes in being like, yeah, like maybe he's good, but probably not. Then he wasn't, and it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. We didn't think he was going to be amazing. We thought Bryce Young, definitely there was some variance to how much people liked him, but he was still a really high-end prospect. I don't think anyone expected him to be as bad as he was last year. So I think the overall expectation is that he's going to get better. I don't know what the expectation is that Will Levis is going to get better. I also just have more faith in Canales fixing Young than I do Callahan fixing Levis. I mean, Callahan's been working with Joe Burrow. You don't have to fix Joe Burrow. He's Joe Burrow, right? Dave Canales has actually fixed quarterbacks that no one thought was any good, that had just been kind of like working their way as backups around the league, and then became really competent starters. So I just think there's just a little bit more upside in Bryce Young, and I think most people can agree with that. I do want to say, though, that like Ridley's good, right? But so is DeAndre Hopkins when healthy. And while Hopkins isn't fully healthy right now, he probably will be either by week 1 or week 2. And we just know that like Hopkins is a target earner, that maybe he's at the tail end of his career, but he's a great wide receiver. He's going to command a solid target share. And so some people on this list have the upside to clearly be the number 1 target on their team. I mean, we don't actually know if Ridley's even going to be the most valuable wide receiver on the Titans. And we don't even know if the Titans can elevate to what we think that they can be because of Will Levis. So ultimately, I can't definitely rank Ridley over McLaurin and Diontae Johnson. I just think the ceiling of those two is just a little bit too high. And just the fact that they are clearly the number 1 pass catchers on their offense, it's too much upside there. And then I also just think the ceiling of Chris Godwin moving back into the slot in this Cooper Kupp role in this offense, I think that's also a little bit too high to ignore. So I think I'm going to rank Ridley right after him. So final rankings are going to be Terry McLaurin, Diontae Johnson, Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, and Christian Kirk. But I will say, if we are looking at like hyper-focusing, considering ADP as well on specific wide receivers in the middle rounds, Diontae Johnson, Chris Godwin, and Calvin Ridley. Those are amazing targets. I truly believe that if you're heavily focusing on those 3, they're great values by ADP. You will be able to land 1 or 2 of them in most drafts, and I think you should be targeting wide receiver in that range, and especially those 3. So that is how I would break down these 5.5 PPR scoring. Again, if you want to see my exact rankings in all scoring formats among all players, plus my detailed projections as well, see them on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And remember the Underdog deal. You can get my rankings for free this season. All you have to do is sign up for promo code FFA, make a minimum $10 deposit. That's it. They'll give you a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, and then my rankings will be emailed to you the following morning as a login to my website, and then you can check out the rankings for free. Again, join the puppy. If you want to do the minimum, just put $10 in. They'll turn it into $15 with that $5 bonus. Join 3 puppy drafts. I think that's the best thing you can do with that $15. So if you watched this far, be sure to leave a like. Really helps me out. And make sure to subscribe to the channel as well so you don't miss out on any more free content. That, my friends, is the end of this one. And thanks for watching.